I used to believe that family was unbreakable, that no matter what happened, the people who raised you, who tucked you in at night and took pictures of your first day of school, would always be in your corner. But that was before I learned how quietly a family can disappear. My name is Elizabeth Mitchell. I'm 35 years old. I live in a small town in Ohio where the winters are long and the silence after a snowfall is the kind that makes you want to whisper, even when you're alone. I teach high school English. I drink too much coffee. I read everything I can get my hands on. And last week, I got married. To a woman. Her name is Rachel. And my parents, the ones who taught me to speak kindly, to pray before dinner, to send thank you cards and never raise my voice in church. They didn't come. They weren't sick. They weren't out of town. They just chose not to. I should have expected it. The signs were there for years. But some part of me, a part that still remembered the way my mom brushed my hair or how my dad used to bring me jelly donuts every Friday before school. Some part of me still believed they'd come around. But that part of me doesn't exist anymore. Growing up, I was always the quiet one. Matt, my younger brother, was the golden boy, star athlete, straight A student, now working in finance and engaged to a woman my mom calls a blessing. I was the girl with too many books and not enough eye contact. The one who wore combat boots with dresses and painted poems on my bedroom walls. They said I was creative. What they meant was different. When I was 29, I came out to my family during Thanksgiving dinner. It wasn't dramatic. No big speech. Just me sitting across from my mom while everyone was watching football, saying the words that had been sitting on my tongue for years. I'm bisexual. Rachel and I have been dating for a while. There was a pause. A long, cold, polite silence. My mom blinked. Her lips curved into the kind of smile you use at a PTA meeting. She nodded once. Well, I hope you're being careful. That was it. The next few months were a slow fade. No yelling, no confrontations. Just less and less. Fewer phone calls. Shorter texts. Less warmth in my father's voice. Less light in my mother's eyes when she saw me. The invitations stopped. First it was my cousin's baby shower. Then a family cookout. Christmas became complicated, and Easter was maybe next year. My name vanished from the group messages. When my brother got engaged, I found out through a Facebook post my mom shared with everyone but me. I told myself they just needed time. That this was a phase. That deep down love would win. But deep down I think I already knew. Still, when Rachel proposed, I hesitated. Not because I wasn't sure, but because I could already hear the silence that would follow. The absence. The way joy is supposed to be shared and how mine would be met with closed doors and turned backs. But Rachel held my hands beneath the maple tree in our backyard, the snow falling around us like a blessing, and she said, "You don't have to be anyone else. Not with me. Not ever again." And I said yes. We planned a small wedding. Nothing fancy. Just friends, a few relatives who still spoke to me, and anyone who ever made me feel like I mattered. I mailed the invitations to my parents anyway. To their house. To their church. To the same address I had memorized since I was 5. They never responded. Until 4 days before the wedding. 4 days before our wedding, I got a voicemail from my mother. No greeting. No congratulations. Just her voice, clipped and polite, like she was reading off a script. "Your brother's wedding got moved up to your weekend. The family's flying in. We'll be at the estate all week. I'm sure you understand." She hung up without waiting for a reply. No mention of the invitation. No "we're sorry." Not even a "good luck." I sat there in my kitchen, phone pressed to my chest like I could somehow squeeze out warmth that wasn't there. Rachel was in the next room, folding napkins into neat little triangles, humming to herself. I didn't tell her about the voicemail right away. Not because I was trying to hide it, but because I didn't have the words. It felt like saying it out loud would make it real in a way I wasn't ready for. Later that night, when I finally played it for her, she just listened, then looked at me with those soft, steady eyes of hers and said, "You knew this was coming, didn't you?" I nodded. She didn't ask why I sent them invitations anyway. She already knew. Because some part of me, a smaller part now but still alive, still wanted them to show up. Still believed maybe that seeing me in white standing with the woman I love might crack something open inside them. But all I got was silence. And that voicemail. I started unraveling after that. Quietly. Not the kind of breakdown you can see from the outside. But the kind where you stop sleeping, where the air feels heavier, where you wake up already bracing for disappointment. I found myself staring at our wedding checklist for hours, not knowing what I was looking at. I double-checked the guest list a dozen times, hoping someone I lost might have RSVP'd late. I kept waiting for a text, a call, a message that never came. One night, I stood in the shower until the hot water ran out, my forehead pressed against the tile, thinking, what if we just didn't do it? Not because I didn't love Rachel. God, I loved her. But because it hurt to imagine walking down that aisle and not seeing my mother's face. Not hearing my father clear his throat before giving me away. Not feeling like a daughter. When I finally admitted that out loud, curled up on the couch wrapped in Rachel's sweater, my voice barely above a whisper, she didn't flinch. She just said, then we'll cancel. Or elope. Or wait. Whatever you need. And I loved her more in that moment than I ever had before. But I shook my head. No, I said. I want to marry you in front of people who love me. Even if they're not the people who made me. She reached out and took my hand, kissed the scar on my knuckle from where I cut myself slicing apples 2 Thanksgivings ago. The last one I spent with my family. We didn't talk about it again. We didn't need to. The silence between us has always been the good kind. The kind that holds you, not the kind that erases you. The week before the wedding, I started getting messages from distant relatives. My Aunt Marlene, who hadn't spoken to me in years, emailed to say she wished she could attend but had other commitments. A cousin I barely knew liked one of my Instagram posts with a vague caption, happy for you, I guess. Jason, my cousin on my dad's side, the only one in the family who's also gay, texted me a screenshot of the group chat I'd been excluded from. In it, my mother wrote, please don't make a fuss about Elizabeth's wedding. We're already dealing with enough family drama this month. My father had replied, it's best to stay quiet. Don't encourage it. I laughed when I read it. Not because it was funny, but because it was so familiar. That was my family in a nutshell. Conflict avoidance wrapped in control, dressed up as propriety. And always the quiet erasure of anything that didn't fit the picture. I spent the night before our rehearsal dinner staring out the bedroom window, watching the breeze move through the trees. The wind sounded like ocean waves, even though we were nowhere near the coast. Rachel was already asleep, one arm draped across my pillow. I thought about writing a letter to my parents, something I could read out loud at the wedding. Something honest. Something final. But I didn't know if I had the strength. Instead, I opened a blank page on my laptop and typed. You taught me to tell the truth. I did. You told me to love deeply. I did. You just didn't like who I told the truth to. Or who I loved. And then I closed the laptop. Outside, the wind kept moving. 2 days before the wedding, I opened Instagram to post a reminder about the location for out-of-town guests. Harmless. Thoughtful. Routine. I didn't expect it to break me. The post was a photo, shared by a distant cousin who didn't even follow me back, of a flower arch being set up at a country estate just outside of town. The caption read, Matt and Danielle's rehearsal weekend begins. Can't wait for Friday. I stared at it for a full minute, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Matt and Danielle. My brother. His fiancée. Their wedding. On Friday. My wedding day. First, I thought maybe it was old. Maybe it was from months ago and someone had accidentally reposted it. But when I clicked the location tag, a flood of new posts followed. Boomerangs of champagne flutes, behind-the-scenes shots of centerpieces being arranged, their initials etched into rose gold napkin rings. It wasn't old. It was happening. Right now. That same week. The same day. They had moved the wedding. Quietly. Strategically. Without telling me. Without telling anyone who might care enough to come to mine instead. I clicked through the posts like I was watching a car crash in slow motion. There was my dad standing next to a wooden welcome sign that read, Welcome to Forever, Matt and Danielle. My mother in a cream dress posing beside my aunt. My grandmother, whom they told me wouldn't understand my relationship, smiling, holding a bouquet of sunflowers. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. I felt something rising in my throat, hot and sharp and humiliating. I set the phone down like it burned. Walked into the kitchen. Poured a glass of water. Poured another. Sat down on the floor in the hallway like my knees couldn't remember how to hold me. Rachel found me there 20 minutes later. She didn't ask what happened. She just knelt beside me, slid the phone from my palm and read everything silently. When she looked up, her face was pale. They planned it this way, she said. I nodded. They made sure no one could come to ours. And it was true. Our guest list had shrunk without explanation. Quiet no's, last-minute cancellations, vague regrets. Now I knew why. Rachel clenched her jaw. We don't have to do this. We can drive to the lake, say our vows, come back when it's over. I could see the fury in her eyes. Not the kind that lashes out, but the kind that protects. That defends. That loves. I took her hand and shook my head. No, I said. I won't let them erase me. That night I barely slept. I lay awake thinking about the things that weren't said, the invitations that were never sent, the way a family can pretend you no longer exist and still smile for the camera. I imagined the speeches they would give at Matt's wedding. My father raising a glass talking about pride and tradition. My mother crying over her perfect daughter-in-law. The applause. The praise. The picture-perfect memory being made just as mine was being buried. It wasn't just rejection. It was replacement. And yet, somewhere in the hollow ache of it all, I felt a flicker of something else. A kind of clarity. This wasn't about misunderstanding anymore. It wasn't about discomfort or confusion. It was about choice. They didn't just fail to show up for me. They actively chose to show up somewhere else, to celebrate love they deemed worthy, while shunning mine. They had made their decision. Now it was time for me to make mine. The morning of the wedding, I woke up before the sun, not from nerves, but from a kind of stillness that didn't feel like peace. It felt like the moment before a storm, the air thick with something unnamed. I moved through the house like I was floating, touching the backs of chairs, adjusting flowers that didn't need adjusting, smoothing tablecloths already smooth. Rachel was in the guest room with her sister, getting ready. I could hear soft laughter behind the closed door, the sound of zippers, brushes, final touches. It was comforting, like music behind a movie scene you don't want to end. Around 9, a woman I didn't recognize showed up at the front gate. Late 50s, elegant church pearls, the kind of person my mother would have played bridge with. She looked out of place among the folding chairs and wildflowers, but she walked up with purpose and handed me a cream envelope. Claire asked me to give you this, she said. She said she didn't want to ruin the mood by coming herself. The words hit me like a slow blow. I took the envelope with a tight nod. The woman gave me a brief, apologetic smile and walked away without another word. I stared at the envelope for a long time. My name was written in my mother's handwriting, neat, controlled, precise. The kind of handwriting she used for grocery lists and thank you notes. I sat down on the porch steps and held it in my lap, like it might decide for me whether or not to open it. Eventually I did. There was no greeting, no warmth, no regret, just this. We hope you are well. By now it is clear to us that your choices are not temporary, nor are they something we can support in good faith. As of today, we will no longer recognize you as our daughter. Please refrain from including our names in any further announcements or public documents, especially those involving your wedding. We do not wish to be associated with a lifestyle that conflicts with our beliefs. We trust you will respect our boundaries. Signed, Claire and Thomas L. Mitchell. No, Mom. No, Dad. Just names cold as the paper they were written on. My hands didn't tremble. I didn't cry. But I felt something deep inside me buckle like an old wooden beam giving way. I folded the letter back into the envelope, walked inside and placed it gently in the bottom drawer of my dresser. I wasn't going to let them take the rest of this day. But Rachel noticed. Of course she did. She found me an hour later in the bathroom, sitting on the closed toilet lid, staring at my bouquet like it had betrayed me. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just sat beside me on the edge of the bathtub and waited. I handed her the letter. She read it once, twice, then quietly tore it into strips and flushed it down the toilet without a word. When she finally spoke, her voice was so calm it made my chest ache. They don't deserve to witness your joy. I nodded. They don't deserve to be your story's ending. I took a deep breath and for the first time in weeks I felt something loosen. Not everything, but enough. He helped me up, brushed the wrinkles from my dress, looked at me like I was everything. Let's go get married, she whispered. The sky that afternoon was the kind of soft blue that only shows up in early spring, the kind that almost feels like an apology for the months of cold that came before it. The backyard had been transformed. White chairs lined the aisle, each one tied with a ribbon that fluttered in the breeze. Wildflowers spilled from mason jars along the walkway, their scent mingling with the fresh-cut grass and the faint hint of vanilla from the cupcakes Rachel's sister had baked that morning. It It wasn't extravagant. It wasn't what you'd see on Pinterest boards labeled elegant weddings. But it was ours. It was real. Guests began to arrive slowly. Friends from college, fellow teachers from the high school, a few of Rachel's relatives who had flown in from Vermont. There was a quiet buzz in the air, the sound of small talk and soft laughter, the shuffle of heels on stone and folding chairs creaking as people settled in. Every now and then someone would come up to hug me, their eyes saying more than their mouths ever could. "You look beautiful," one of my former students whispered. "Thank you for inviting me," said the school janitor who used to save me cafeteria muffins during exam week. They weren't just guests. They were the stitches holding my life together. Jason arrived a few minutes later with his boyfriend Evan, both of them dressed in matching gray suits with navy ties. Jason didn't say anything at first. He just pulled me into a hug that lasted too long and said against my ear, "You made it. You really made it." I nodded into his shoulder, holding on like he was the only thing keeping me upright. When I pulled back, I tried to smile. "You know Grandma's not coming," I said quietly, even though he hadn't asked. Jason's eyes darkened a little. "I wouldn't be so sure," he said. I shook my head. "She's with them. She has to be." He opened his mouth to respond but was cut off by the sudden music cue, Rachel's processional song playing faintly through the garden speakers. The coordinator waved at me. It was time. My breath caught. My heart thudded against my ribs like it wanted out. I reached for my bouquet, hands cold despite the warm sunlight, and stood behind the trellis archway that led to the aisle. I couldn't see the guests from there. Just the rows of white chairs and the petals scattered down the grass path, like a trail through a dream I wasn't sure I deserved to be having. Then I heard her voice. "Elizabeth." I turned, and there she was. My grandmother. She stood at the edge of the stone path, wearing a soft pink dress, her white hair curled neatly, her lipstick faded but still there. In her hands was a single white rose. She looked at me like she had waited her whole life to see me this way. I froze. You came," I whispered, my voice breaking on the second word. She smiled, stepped closer and gently handed me the rose. "I raised your mother to be better than this," she said, her voice clear, steady. "And I'm sorry she forgot what love looks like." My knees buckled, but she caught me before I could fall. I wrapped my arms around her, burying my face in her shoulder, sobbing with the kind of release I hadn't allowed myself since I was a child. When I pulled away, she was crying too. "May I walk you down the aisle?" she asked, like it was the most normal question in the world. I could only nod. And so, with one arm around the woman who gave me my middle name, who used to bake cinnamon rolls every Sunday and teach me how to sew buttons back onto shirts, I walked toward the rest of my life. The music swelled. Heads turned. Gasps echoed softly as people realized who was beside me. I saw Rachel at the end of the aisle, eyes wide, one hand over her mouth, the other already shaking with tears. She looked like light in human form. The ceremony blurred. I remember holding Rachel's hands, noticing how warm and steady they were. I remember Jason reading a poem by Mary Oliver, his voice cracking near the end. I remember Rachel's vows, how she said I was her home, her compass, her fire. I remember forgetting how to breathe. When it was my turn, I tried to speak, but my voice trembled too much. So I reached into the pocket of my dress and pulled out a note card, shaking as I unfolded it. "You were the first person who never asked me to explain," I read, eyes locked on Rachel's. "You never made me smaller. You never made me quieter. You saw me and you stayed. You stayed when I didn't even believe I was worth staying for. And I promise for the rest of my life, to be the person who stays for you." There wasn't a dry eye in sight. We kissed to applause, laughter, the clinking of glasses and the snap of 100 photos trying to catch the exact second joy reached its peak. After the ceremony, we walked hand in hand through the garden, people showering us with petals, confetti, noise. My grandmother held onto my bouquet like it was a sacred thing. Rachel's nieces danced barefoot on the lawn. Jason gave a toast so funny and beautiful it made half the crowd snort and the other half cry. And I, who had braced myself for grief, for the dull ache of what was missing, felt nothing but full. Not complete. That's a lie we tell ourselves. But full. Filled with something real, something hard-earned and honest. Filled with people who didn't share my blood but shared something better. My truth. That night, under string lights and a rising moon, Rachel and I had our first dance to a cover of The Book of Love. She kept whispering, "We did it," into my ear. And I kept saying, I know, back. I didn't think about the letter. I didn't think about the estate where my brother was probably giving his speech about family values. All I thought about was this. Love showed up. And it stayed. The sun was slipping below the horizon by the time everyone settled into their seats under the canopy of fairy lights. Dinner plates clinked softly, silverware scraped china, and laughter rippled like warm water through the garden. People were full, on food, on wine, on something lighter than air that hung around us like perfume. It should have been the moment to just breathe, to finally exhale. But I couldn't. Jason tapped a fork against his glass and stood ready to give his toast. He spoke about growing up as the other gay cousin, about how I was the first person in the family who made him feel less alone. He made people laugh, then cry, then laugh again. When he sat down, he looked at me and whispered, "You should say something." I hadn't planned to. Not really. But something inside me was still burning. So I stood. The murmurs faded. A hush fell over the garden. I stepped into the open space between the tables and pulled a folded sheet of paper from my pocket. The letter I had written the night before, the one I never meant to read. My voice was quiet at first, but clear. "You taught me to be honest," I began. "So I told you the truth. You taught me to love fully. So I did. You told me to be brave, and I was. But you never said what to do when bravery made me unlovable to the people I loved the most." I paused, let the silence sit. A breeze caught the corner of the page, fluttering it like a heartbeat. "You said I was selfish. That I made things hard. That I broke your hearts. But all I ever wanted was to be seen without being erased. To be loved without condition. To be your daughter without apology." A fork dropped somewhere near the back. A chair creaked. Rachel's hand was on the back of my thigh, steadying me. I spent years trying to earn a seat at a table that only existed when I played pretend. But today I sat at a new table. And I wasn't ashamed. Because shame can't survive where love lives. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. "To anyone who ever felt like they had to hide to stay loved, I see you. That was you. And today I let that version of myself rest." I folded the paper and placed it on the table beside me. No dramatic mic drop. No tears. Just quiet. The applause started slowly, one clap, then another. Some people stood. Others stayed seated, faces unreadable. A woman near the back whispered something to her husband and left. A friend of my father's looked down at his plate. But most of them clapped. Jason stood and started a chant, "To truth." Others joined in. Glasses were raised. Toasts echoed. But beneath it all was that subtle shift. The knowledge that something real had just happened. Not a wedding speech. Not a performance. A reckoning. Later, some guests told me it was the bravest thing they'd ever seen. Others said it was too much. That a wedding shouldn't be political, shouldn't carry that kind of weight. One woman cornered me near the bar and said, "Your parents are grieving too, you know." I didn't argue. I just nodded. But deep down I knew. They weren't grieving. They were pretending I never existed. And I was done letting that silence be the last word. 2 days after the wedding, I was standing in the kitchen, barefoot, hair still damp from the shower, watching steam rise from the kettle when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something in me knew before I even answered. I let it ring once. Twice. Then picked up. "Hello." Silence. Then a breath. Then her voice. "Elizabeth." I closed my eyes. It was like hearing a ghost. Not because she sounded different, but because she sounded exactly the same. Measured. Cool. Practiced. "We saw the photos," she said. "You made quite the public show." I said nothing. Let her speak. "There were things in your speech that didn't need to be said. It was hurtful. To us. To the family. Don't you think you've caused enough embarrassment?" I swallowed. My fingers tightened around the phone. "You chose not to come," I said quietly. "You chose not to call. Not to write. You chose silence." "We were trying to protect the family," she snapped, her composure slipping just a little. "From what?" I asked. "From me being happy?" There was a pause. She didn't answer. "It's done now," she said instead. "I just hope you're satisfied." I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because it was so painfully predictable. Even now it wasn't about me. It was about their image. Their discomfort. Their carefully curated version of truth. "I am," I said. "I'm satisfied." She exhaled like she was expecting a fight and didn't get one. Then I suppose there's nothing else to say. I could hear the unsaid words beneath hers. No apology. No affection. No attempt to reach for the girl she used to brush hair for on Sunday mornings. Just finality. Cold and clean. No, I said. There isn't. And then I hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't call Jason. I didn't even tell Rachel right away. I just stood there in the quiet, listening to the kettle scream, and felt a peace I hadn't known I needed. The kind that comes not from getting what you hoped for, but from finally letting go of the hope that hurt you. The house was quiet the next morning, the kind of quiet that doesn't press on you, but wraps around you like a warm blanket. Sunlight slipped through the kitchen window in golden strips across the table. Rachel was still asleep upstairs, one arm surely flung across my side of the bed like she always did. I let the kettle steep, poured 2 cups of tea and set one beside her on the nightstand without waking her. Then I stepped outside barefoot into the grass, still damp from the morning dew. The backyard looked different now. The chairs were gone, the flower petals swept up, the tables folded and packed. But the energy, it lingered. Like something holy had happened here. I could still feel it in the air. In the soil. In the space between breaths. I sat down on the old wooden bench near the tree line, the one where I used to write poetry in high school, and opened a letter that had been left anonymously in our guest book. Read. Ms. Mitchell, I was one of your students. You probably don't remember me. I used to sit in the back and never raise my hand. I didn't know what love looked like growing up. I never saw it at home. But I saw it in your classroom. I saw it this weekend. Thank you for reminding me that love doesn't have to ask permission to exist. I read it twice, then folded it and held it to my chest. That afternoon I watered the garden while Rachel made pancakes from scratch. We danced in the living room to an old Fleetwood Mac song. Later we painted the spare bedroom into a reading nook, our after-wedding honeymoon project, she called it. Life felt unglamorous. Soft. And I didn't think about who wasn't calling, who wasn't coming, who didn't show up for me. Because for the first time in my life I wasn't chasing absence. I was living in presence. I kept thinking about the people who did come. My grandmother standing proudly beside me. Jason who clapped the loudest. Rachel's sister who cried through the entire ceremony like she was giving me away too. The janitor. The student. The strangers who stayed when blood didn't. Family isn't always biology. Sometimes it's resilience. Sometimes it's recognition. Sometimes it's someone handing you a white rose and asking to walk beside you when you thought no one would. And sometimes, it's silence that finally sets you free. If you've ever felt like the black sheep, like the family disappointment, like the one who didn't belong, maybe this story was for you. Because maybe you don't need to be accepted by everyone. Maybe you just need to be truly loved by a few. And maybe, that's more than enough. So now I ask you, have you ever had to choose peace over people? Have you ever lost family to find yourself? If this story meant something to you, drop a below and tell me, was it worth it? Yes or no? I'd love to know. And if you believe stories like this matter, subscribe to our channel. Because somewhere out there someone's still waiting for a sign that they're not alone. Let's be that sign.